What if I told you that for over 2 years, the most powerful religious position on earth was held by a woman? That every cardinal, every bishop, every priest bowed before her, kissed her ring, and followed her divine commands without ever suspecting the truth? That she gave birth to a child in the middle of a sacred procession, surrounded by thousands of faithful believers who thought they were witnessing a miracle. The story of Pope Joan is not just another medieval legend. It's a tale of deception so audacious, so perfectly executed, that it shook the foundations of Christianity itself. For centuries, the Vatican has tried to erase this story from history, labeling it as myth, folklore, nothing more than medieval fantasy. But the evidence suggests something far more scandalous. Picture this: a brilliant woman in the 9th century, living in a world where females were forbidden from learning to read, let alone studying theology. Yet she not only mastered the scriptures, but became so eloquent, so convincing in her biblical interpretations, that she rose through the ranks of the church hierarchy faster than any man of her time. She fooled cardinals, bishops, and the entire papal court for years. And when her secret was finally revealed, it happened in the most dramatic way imaginable. This isn't just about one woman's incredible deception. It's about how the most powerful institution in medieval Europe could be completely blindsided by someone they never saw coming. It's about what happened when divine authority collided with biological reality in front of thousands of witnesses. And it's about why, even today, tourists in Rome are shown a mysterious chair with a hole in it, used supposedly to verify the gender of papal candidates. If you're ready to discover how one woman's audacious plan nearly brought down the papacy itself, make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment about what you think happened when the truth was finally revealed. Because what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about medieval Christianity. The Catholic Church in the 9th century was the undisputed superpower of Europe. When the Pope spoke, kings listened. When he issued decrees, entire nations obeyed. The papal throne in Rome wasn't just a religious position, it was the ultimate seat of political, social, and spiritual authority over millions of souls. The process of becoming pope was incredibly complex and secretive. Only the most learned men, those who had spent decades studying theology, canon law, and church doctrine, could even dream of rising through the ecclesiastical ranks. Cardinals were chosen from among the most brilliant scholars, men who could debate scripture in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. The Pope himself was selected by these cardinals in meetings so secret that, even today, we barely understand how decisions were made. In this world, women were essentially invisible in religious matters. They couldn't become priests, couldn't read from the altar, couldn't even enter certain parts of churches. The idea of a woman holding any significant position in the church hierarchy was not just unlikely, it was considered impossible, even blasphemous. The official doctrine stated that women were spiritually inferior, created to serve men, and their monthly cycles made them ritually unclean. Yet according to multiple medieval sources, including chroniclers from different countries who had no reason to coordinate their stories, something unprecedented happened around 855 CE. A pope took the throne who was different from all others. This pope was notably shorter than average, had an unusually smooth face, and spoke with a voice that was remarkably melodious. Church officials at the time attributed these characteristics to divine blessing. God had chosen someone with an angelic appearance to lead his church. The official records show that this pope demonstrated unprecedented knowledge of scripture and theology. During debates with visiting scholars and bishops, this pontiff displayed an understanding of religious texts that impressed even the most learned men of the time. The pope's sermons were described as unusually compassionate, focusing heavily on themes of mercy, forgiveness, and caring for the vulnerable, a departure from the typically harsh rhetoric of medieval church leaders. What made this pope even more remarkable was the administrative efficiency. Church records from this period show an unusual attention to detail in managing church resources, establishing new hospitals, and creating programs to help poor women and children. Some historians have noted that these policies were surprisingly progressive for the time, almost as if someone with personal understanding of women's struggles was making the decisions. For over 2 years, this pope led the church with distinction. Cardinals praised their leader's wisdom. Common people loved the unusually compassionate sermons, and even rival kingdoms respected the papal authority. Everything seemed perfectly normal in the highest echelons of Catholic power. But perfection built on deception never lasts forever. The truth behind this papal reign is far more shocking than any medieval chronicler dared to fully describe. What they discovered was that this pope was actually a woman named Joan, who had been living as a man for decades. But her story of deception goes far deeper than simple disguise. Joan wasn't just pretending to be a man. She had created an entirely fictional identity so convincing that she fooled the most intelligent and suspicious men in Europe. Born in England around 822, she had witnessed her brothers receiving education while she was confined to domestic duties. But Joan possessed an intelligence so extraordinary that she secretly learned to read by listening to her brothers' lessons and studying their books at night. When her family moved to Rome, Joan made a decision that would change everything. She cut her hair, bound her chest, and began living as John Anglicus, an English scholar seeking religious education. What's astounding is that she didn't just fool casual acquaintances. She attended the papal school, debated with future cardinals, and impressed teachers who spent their lives studying human nature and detecting deception. Joan's biological advantages actually helped her deception. Medieval men typically went months without bathing, had poor diets that often resulted in smaller, frailer builds, and many had high-pitched voices due to various health conditions. Joan's natural intelligence, combined with her desperate motivation to maintain her disguise, made her study harder and perform better than most of her male classmates. But here's where the story becomes truly scandalous. Joan wasn't just hiding her gender. She was also carrying on a secret romantic relationship. Medieval sources suggest she became involved with a papal assistant, someone who knew her true identity and helped maintain her cover. This relationship was not just emotionally dangerous, it was politically explosive, as it involved someone with access to the highest levels of church secrets. The logistics of Joan's deception required incredible planning. She had to avoid medical examinations, create excuses for certain behaviors, and constantly monitor her voice, posture, and mannerisms. She developed techniques for using the bathroom without arousing suspicion, found ways to explain why she never grew a full beard, and created a network of allies who helped protect her secret. For years, This elaborate charade worked perfectly. Joan rose through the ranks faster than most men, not because of political connections or family wealth, but because her fear of discovery made her work twice as hard as anyone else. Cardinals who voted for her election as pope thought they were choosing the most brilliant scholar of their generation. They had no idea they were crowning the most audacious deceiver in church history. Joan's personal story reads like the plot of an impossible thriller, but medieval chroniclers recorded details that make it clear this was no simple fairy tale. The woman who would become pope was born into a world that offered her no legitimate path to the education and power she craved. As a child in England, Joan displayed an almost supernatural hunger for knowledge. While other girls her age learned spinning and cooking, she memorized entire passages of scripture just by hearing them once. Her brothers, who were being prepared for church careers, often found her reading their books in secret. When they tested her knowledge as a joke, they discovered she understood complex theological concepts better than they did. Joan's transformation into John Anglicus required more than just cutting her hair and wearing men's clothing. She had to study how men moved, how they spoke, how they interacted with each other in ways that women were never supposed to observe. She practiced lowering her voice until it became natural, learned to walk with longer strides, and developed masculine gestures that would become second nature. The most dangerous part of her deception wasn't physical, it was intellectual. Joan had to become not just convincing as a man, but exceptional as a scholar. She threw herself into studying with an intensity that amazed her teachers. While other students slept, she memorized entire books of the Bible. While they socialized, she learned Greek, Hebrew, and advanced philosophy. Her fear of discovery drove her to academic achievements that no one suspected came from desperation rather than divine inspiration. When Joan arrived in Rome as a young man, she entered a world of brutal competition. Future church leaders fought viciously for advancement, using every advantage of birth, wealth, and political connections. Joan had none of these advantages, but she had something else. The knowledge that failure meant not just career disappointment, but potential execution for heresy and fraud. Her romantic relationship began innocently enough. A papal assistant noticed the brilliant young scholar who seemed to understand scripture with unusual compassion and insight. What started as intellectual discussions evolved into something deeper. The man who became her lover was himself torn between attraction to her mind and growing suspicions about certain aspects of her behavior. When he finally learned the truth, he faced an impossible choice. Exposing Joan would destroy her, but it might also destroy him for failing to detect the deception earlier. Instead, he became her accomplice, helping her navigate the increasingly complex challenges of maintaining her disguise at the highest levels of church hierarchy. Their relationship had to be conducted in absolute secrecy, with stolen moments between official duties and secret meetings in locations where discovery would mean death for both of them. Yet somehow, in the midst of this incredible stress and danger, Joan managed to excel in her duties so effectively that cardinals began discussing her as papal material. When the time came for papal election, Joan's reputation as a scholar had grown so extraordinary that she was considered the obvious choice. The cardinals who voted for her believed they were selecting someone blessed by God with unusual wisdom and purity. They had no idea they were crowning someone whose entire identity was built on the most elaborate deception in church history. The moment when Joan's secret was finally revealed has become one of the most dramatic and controversial stories in medieval history. According to multiple independent chroniclers from different European countries, the truth came out in the most shocking way imaginable. During a papal procession through the streets of Rome, in front of thousands of witnesses, it was supposed to be a routine ceremonial event. Pope Joan, dressed in full papal regalia, was leading a procession from St. Peter's Basilica to the Lateran Palace. Cardinals, bishops, and hundreds of clergy followed behind, while thousands of Roman citizens lined the streets to witness their spiritual leader's passage. The procession moved slowly through the narrow streets, with Joan blessing the crowd from her papal throne carried by attendants. But Joan had been hiding a secret that was about to become impossible to conceal. She was 9 months pregnant. Medieval sources describe what happened next in terms that suggest the witnesses could barely process what they were seeing. Somewhere between the Colosseum and the Church of San Clemente, Joan suddenly collapsed. The attendants carrying her throne stopped in confusion as she doubled over in obvious distress. Cardinals rushed forward, thinking their pope was having some kind of divine vision or religious ecstasy. Instead, Joan went into labor right there in the street, surrounded by the entire leadership of the Catholic Church and thousands of faithful believers. The realization of what was happening hit the crowd in waves. First confusion, then shock, then absolute pandemonium as people understood they were witnessing the impossible, their pope giving birth to a child. The baby's cries echoed through the narrow Roman street, mixing with the screams of horrified spectators and the shouts of clergy trying to maintain order. Joan, weakened by childbirth and the stress of her collapsing deception, could no longer maintain her disguise. Her true identity became undeniable to everyone present. What followed was chaos beyond anything medieval Rome had ever experienced. Some witnesses fell to their knees, convinced they were witnessing either a miracle or the apocalypse. Others began throwing stones, screaming accusations of heresy and blasphemy. Cardinals stood frozen in disbelief, unable to process that they had been bowing before and taking orders from a woman for over 2 years. According to some accounts, Joan died within hours, either from complications of childbirth or from violence by the enraged crowd. Other versions suggest she survived long enough to be questioned about her deception, revealing details about how she had maintained her disguise for so long. The baby's fate remains unknown. Some sources claim it died with her. Others suggest it was secretly spirited away by sympathizers. The immediate aftermath was unprecedented in church history. The entire papal court was thrown into crisis. Cardinals who had worked closely with Joan faced questions about whether they had been complicit in the deception. Church officials who had praised her wisdom now had to explain how they had been so thoroughly fooled. The man who had been her lover disappeared from historical records entirely. Whether he was executed, exiled, or simply vanished to avoid consequences remains unknown. The Vatican's response was swift and decisive. All official records of Joan's papacy were ordered destroyed. Her name was struck from papal lists, and anyone who spoke of the events was threatened with excommunication. But you can't erase the memories of thousands of witnesses to one of the most shocking events in medieval history. The aftermath of Joan's exposure created ripples that continue to this day. revealing just how deeply her brief reign had shaken the foundations of medieval Christianity. The Catholic Church's response to this crisis became a case study in institutional damage control that would influence how the Vatican handled scandals for centuries to come. Within days of Joan's death, Pope Nicholas I issued unprecedented orders. All documents relating to the previous papal reign were to be collected and destroyed. Scribes were ordered to rewrite official church histories, removing any mention of Joan's papacy. The period between Pope Leo IV and Pope Benedict III was officially declared to have lasted only 4 weeks, though witnesses knew Joan had ruled for over 2 years. But the Church faced an impossible task: erasing the memories of thousands of people who had witnessed the most dramatic papal scandal in history. Roman citizens had seen their pope give birth in the street. Cardinals had watched their spiritual leader's deception unravel before their eyes. News of these events spread throughout Europe faster than church officials could suppress it. The Vatican's solution was to declare the entire story a malicious fabrication created by enemies of the Church. Anyone who claimed to have witnessed Joan's papacy was threatened with excommunication. Clergy who mentioned the events were transferred to remote locations or forced into monastic silence. The official position became that the whole story was an impossible fantasy, a lie created to undermine papal authority. Yet medieval chroniclers across Europe began recording the story independently. Martin of Opava wrote about Joan in his Chronicle of the Popes and Emperors. Jean de Mailly included her story in his Universal Chronicle. Chroniclers in England, France, and Germany all recorded versions of events, often with details that matched despite being written in different countries by people who had never communicated with each other. The Church introduced new procedures that seemed designed to prevent another Joan situation. The infamous chair with a hole in it, known as the sedia stercoraria, was installed for papal elections. Official explanations claimed it was for ceremonial purposes, but popular belief held that it was used to physically verify that papal candidates were male. The procedure of testicular examination became part of papal coronation ceremonies for centuries. Medieval Romans began avoiding a particular street where Joan had allegedly given birth. The area between the Colosseum and San Clemente became known as the Cursed Path, and papal processions were rerouted to avoid it entirely. This change in traditional ceremonial routes lasted for hundreds of years, long after the official reasons were forgotten. The story of Pope Joan evolved into a powerful symbol that different groups used for various purposes. Protestant reformers during the Reformation pointed to her as evidence of Catholic Church corruption and the danger of papal authority. Feminist writers used her as an example of women's intellectual capabilities being suppressed by patriarchal institutions. Critics of religious authority cited her story as proof that even the most sacred institutions could be deceived and corrupted. Today, the Vatican officially maintains that Joan never existed, calling her a medieval legend with no historical basis. Vatican archives remain sealed regarding documents from the 9th century, making independent verification impossible. Yet the story refuses to die. Archaeological evidence suggests that papal procession routes were indeed changed during the period in question. Historical records show unexplained gaps in papal documentation precisely when Joan's reign allegedly occurred. Modern historians remain divided. Some point to the multiple independent sources and consistent details across different chronicles as evidence that something extraordinary happened. Others argue that the story spread as medieval folklore, with chroniclers copying each other's accounts rather than recording independent memories. But perhaps the most telling evidence is the Church's reaction itself. If Joan's story were truly just harmless medieval folklore, why did the Vatican work so hard to suppress it? Why were new verification procedures introduced? Why were traditional ceremonial routes changed? The institutional response suggests that whatever happened in 9th century Rome was significant enough to require unprecedented damage control measures. The legend of Pope Joan continues to fascinate people today because it represents something deeper than just one woman's incredible deception. It's a story about the power of intelligence over authority, about the lengths people will go to achieve their dreams, and about how even the most powerful institutions can be vulnerable to someone they never saw coming. Whether Joan was real or legend, her story reveals truths about medieval society, religious authority, and human ambition that remain relevant today. In a world where women were considered intellectually inferior and spiritually unworthy, someone may have proven that gender was just another barrier to be overcome by sufficient determination and brilliance. The mystery remains. What really happened in those narrow Roman streets over 1,000 years ago? The Vatican's archives hold secrets that may never be revealed. But the story of Pope Joan lives on, challenging us to question authority, remember the marginalized, and consider what other impossible stories from history might actually be true. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories that challenge everything you thought you knew. And leave a comment telling us what you think really happened. Was Joan real? Or is this the greatest medieval conspiracy theory of all time? The truth might be stranger than any legend.